Good afternoon or good morning. Oh, it is afternoon. July 11th, July 18th. All right. It is July 18th, Saturday. And again, we have a lot to talk about. We're only going to do a limited show today. Um, again, could talk about a million different things. I think we're going to limit it to one or two. One of them being money, the big issues of money. We really have only talked about it a little bit, but the big issues really are not being addressed, other than on purpose, they're not being addressed, especially by this Republican president, Republican Senate that refuses to do anything but support the very wealthy of this country. We have seen during the last few months trillions of dollars stolen from the American public by the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and transferred over to wealthy companies, wealthy corporations, people connected to senators and the president. It's money laundering 101. It's stealing vast amount of money that will never be returned. I'm a banker. I've been a banker for 40 years. I've been a banker all my life. Since the Patriot Act and other acts during the 90s and the 1990s and 2000s, there have been a number of laws that have supposedly require the system, individual banks, individual bankers to report every single transaction to the federal government that is suspicious. It could be 5 cents. A lot of people in the public think that the only transactions that are reported are 10,000 and above that may be questionable or in cash, and that's not true. Actually, every single transaction in this country is recorded, every one, whether it's a penny or more, and whether it's a deposit, withdrawal, a money order, anything. It is recorded and saved, and so that the government has a record in case it wants to come after you. And I feel personally that it's unconstitutional. I feel those laws are Gestapo, Nazi type laws. But, I happen to have been born in a free country under a constitution called the United States, something that's changed quite a bit since I was born. So the Patriot Act, it's funny, but supposedly the point of all this is that those related laws were supposed to manage and identify money laundering, money interests from outside the country, supposedly to take care of terrorists and address terrorists and all that baloney, which it's never really done because it really doesn't exist to any great degree. Or any small degree, really, too much. Really, all the laws that are being brought, those laws that are on the books because of that, and the events of 9/11 and related events that have been put up to the public as foreign interests, that we're going to get foreign interests out of the United States money that may be trying to topple the Federal Reserve. Um, the funny thing is that all the people that are trying to break that law and are breaking that law, all the United States and are Americans. They are the wealthy. They are the ones actually who are elected and are supposedly the people who are protecting us. These are the people that are doing the biggest amount of money laundering. They're the politicians, public servants, elected senators, congressmen, local officials, state officials. The corruption is wide, deep, both parties. Of course, the Republican Party is, uh, boy, they're on a level that is, that goes beyond Mars. But Democrats are unfortunately not too far behind. So I'm not being a hypocrite. It's both parties. But the Republican Party is, without a doubt, the winner and champion of this. Uh, the problem is that it's really has nothing, almost nothing to do with party. It has to do with class in the United States, of power. And see, power seems to be my favorite word, but power is what it's about. Um, Money. The powerful can never get enough of it. There's never enough. There's never too much. $100 billion is not enough for the 2 or 3 people in the world that have that kind of money. It's not enough, and they want more. Uh, so those people who could take advantage of the 2 and 3 and 4 trillion dollars that's been transferred from the American government to Wall Street during the last couple of months, they've broken every law in the book. Uh, does anybody go to jail? Did anybody go to jail from 2008 to 2014 during the economic meltdown then? That was created by Wall Street, created by banks that invested in high risk uh, monetary transactions and instruments. They lost huge amounts of money on their own, their decision, the decision by their CEOs, the decision by their corporate boards, and the taxpayer, the dummies, bailed them out instead of using our money to bail out people who are about to lose their home. 20 million people lost their home, their cars, their homes, their jobs during that period of time. We are right on the edge of, in fact, 30, 40, or 50 million people who have now just lost their jobs during the last few months. An amount that, by the way, only during the 1930s Great Depression is equal to it in percentage of the country. And we're talking, and we have a government that's talking like everything is terrific. And we're trying to go back to being normal. The Democrats are talking about it that way also, really. There isn't too much of a difference. Again, I'm a Democrat, but you have to be honest. And so you have both sides really not providing any kind of solution. The Democrats look like they're being tough because they're passing all of these, and they're also not passing a lot of things that should be passed to help people who have nothing. But they pass these things knowing that the Senate, the Republican Senate, is going to stop them anyway. So they go, here, look, we passed something. We know it's not going to pass in the Republican Senate, but we're going to be tough. Well, you can be tough all you want, knowing that it's not going anywhere and knowing that a Republican president's not going to sign it. So you can look like you can pass everything you want. You can pass the greatest bills of all time. But until you get the presidency, until you get the Senate, It's all meaningless. It's meaningless. It's a joke. So that's why this November, uh, as much as it's not the greatest of, earth shattering things, it is one step better or two steps better, depending on where you're at mentally, I suppose, and in the rhetoric of the two parties. That it's better to be, and I agree, it is slightly better to be electing the Democratic House and Senate and President over what we have now. What we have now is a complete disaster, and for I think obvious reasons. I think people who are for Trump, it doesn't matter if you're from South Carolina or northern New York State near the Canadian border. I don't care if you have a high school diploma or you never graduated fifth grade or you went to Harvard and somehow you're still a Republican. It doesn't matter. You know that supporting Trump and supporting Republicans is probably the most un-American thing you can possibly do. Unconstitutional. Everything that they're doing is borderline unconstitutional. Uh, transferring funds from one thing to another without Congress agreeing to it. Um, you know, breaking up the EPA, breaking up the public schools, and wars that continue to go on forever, increasing the defense budget to amounts that are so astronomical. Again, if you sat down and thought about it, if Republicans sat down and thought about it for 5 seconds and actually thought, gee, do I really want nearly one half of the entire budget of the United States to go towards war instead of jobs and jobs and jobs and building roads and hospitals and schools in the United States? It's our tax dollars, and yeah, why wouldn't I want them to be? Why wouldn't I want our tax dollars to be used in, for us? It doesn't have anything to do with party. Nothing. It has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. It has to do with our tax. It's an economic question. Again, I've been a banker my entire life, 40 years, and I worked for the Small Business Administration in the Northeast, in the New York, New Jersey offices, and in Puerto Rico, and in the Virgin Islands, doing disaster work, hurricane work, flood work. And so this is an economic issue. It has nothing to do with politics. Politics baloney. But I have to ask it. Or state it, if you're a Republican, it's nuts to take your money, your Republican taxpayer dollars, and take at least half of it and throw it at something that is complete waste. You don't get to use it. Your family doesn't get to use it. Your kids don't get to use it. It doesn't go towards cleaner air that your kids are going to be breathing 20, 30, 40 years from now. It goes towards some aircraft carrier that eventually is going to be melted down and put into a scrap heap somewhere, and it's never going to be utilized. That's economics. It has nothing to do with politics. And so once you start to think about it a little bit, you go, oh, God, they've been taking my money from me all these years, as long as I've been voting Republican. Holy crap. And using it for crap that I've been jumping up and down and yelling America, USA, USA. That doesn't do anything for me and my family, but it looks good on a bumper sticker, on a car, or on a flag, or on something that is completely and totally irrelevant. It has nothing to do with making you or your family better. So, that's America in the last 20, 30 years. So, um, the big money, the money, the money, the money, as they said during Watergate, as they say it during a lot of things, follow the money. And the money is where it is. Um, I, besides being a banker, my major was political science. My specialty was international law. And I worked for and interned for a congressman. I was close to a couple of other offices of congressmen and from where I live and where I grew up. And one of those congressmen slash senators, somebody who I knew personally, took $500,000. Somebody who I knew. I didn't have to know, find out about it on the news or find out that some senator from some faraway state took money. It was somebody that had been in my house where I grew up. So corruption, I saw firsthand. And not only that, not only is it on the national level, it's on a very local level. It's on every level. When you get involved in politics on a local level, corruption is one of the things that you are introduced to nearly right away. When I first ran for office, I was 24 years old. And I was already a banker for a couple of years. But I've been very involved in politics my whole life already by then. And I wanted to become a congressman really at that point. And so I ran for a local office in New Jersey, in the town next to where I grew up and where I was presently living. And I ran for town council in a small New Jersey town, and with a couple of other people. It was a Republican town up until that time, and but the Republicans were having trouble, and they saw that I was a very young and up and coming kid, and I was very close to our congressman, who was a Democrat, and was in his office every day. So some of the party leaders, the Republican Party leaders, get this, the Republican Party leaders started to notice, and they were starting to get a little worried that the Democrats were going to win in their town. And the Democrats had not won in the town in 10 years. So they were getting a little nervous, and they knew some of the issues that I was involved in. And so one of the issues was rent control. Now, me being a banker and all that stuff, I knew all about the banks holding, mortgages on and apartment houses and all that stuff, and small investors who have 1 to 4 family investment property. And so the real estate people did not want rent control. Now, at the time, I was fighting not for just rent control for everybody. I was fighting for rent control really just for senior citizens. Something that could go either way. There are times that I've been very hot on the idea. There have been times where I've been cooler on the idea. You have to be honest with yourself. A lot of ideas are good at one point, not the greatest at the other. It really depends. So you just live life, and there are times on the same issue that you can be for it, or maybe not be either way, or be against it. It depends on the situation and the variables that are happening at the time. So to be mature about it and to think about it, it depends. So, so the Republicans decided to get one of the bankers from another bank that I was not working for, and they find me somewhere, and I'm walking around somewhere. It's been a long time since this happened, and they put their arm around me, and they start saying to me, they start talking to me, and we think you're a smart kid, and we know that you're up and coming, and blah blah blah, and you have a chance to win here, and we don't want you, we kind of like you and all this stuff, but we don't want you to talk about rent control. So here it is, and I know what's going on right away because of who I am and my background. I know their whole script. They didn't have to say another word. I mean, I knew everything what they were going to tell me, and all the shit that they were about to shovel into me. And so they promised me a job with the other bank, money, and all this other stuff. They promised me everything. The world is going to be great, and I'll be living in Oz forever, as long as if I win, that I don't talk about rent control. And the reason why was because this other bank owned about 25% of the real estate of multi-unit properties in the town. So, and I knew all that already. So I looked at the guy and I was laughing my head off. Excuse me. And he said, "What's so funny?" And I said, "I guess you're used to people saying yes to you, and taking your corruption," or whatever I said. But I did say straight out to him. I said, "No thanks. I know who I am, and I know what I'm for and against, and I don't need your stinking job." And that bank did go out. It doesn't exist anymore. It was bought out. And but that's the corruption, right at a low level, very small town, where people put their arms around you. You don't know who they are really, and they're promising you the world. And that's how very serious issues are never, ever addressed. So if you take it from that level and then you go all the way up, and you see what happens with AOC and Bernie Sanders and all of that, where you can see it straight out, where important issues are not really being addressed, because from the day that they're elected, the Congresswoman AOC even stated it, and a couple of other ones stated it, that they bring them right into a room where there's a big party going on, and congressmen are all there that were just elected for the very first time. Now, many of them don't have my background. Even when I was in my 20s, I knew the whole game. But many of them are elected, and they weren't in politics before. They don't know the whole game, and they don't know the relationships of people within the same party, and all of the interests and the money that's running around from one side of the room to the other. The room it's like envelopes bouncing back and forth with money, and I'm not kidding. And it's sad, but that's the truth of American politics. It's driven by money on every level. And so that said, so that if you're able to get a Congress and a president and a Supreme Court that actually have gotten to that level and still want and try to do the right thing, it is an unbelievable rarity to get that. to happen. Um, Probably it's, I don't know how many times it's happened. Probably in the past, I would have said a few times. I think with FDR was probably one of the most unique situations in the history of the planet. Teddy Roosevelt, the Roosevelts to a certain extent uh, helped shape this the world we live in, and uh, look, both were human. Both Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt. They're both human. Nobody's perfect, and Abraham Lincoln's not perfect. But um, they probably, on the scale of humanity, uh, did try to do the right thing. Obviously, Franklin Roosevelt has the track record. Um, John Kennedy, if he survived his murder, then he probably would be in that ballpark. Um, Bobby Kennedy, probably, but um, I don't know of too many other presidents that I've lived under. Uh, and I've lived under Eisenhower to all the ones that are up until today, and the Republicans are all on the bottom of the heap, but the Democrats, uh, you want to give them a hug, but it's really hard because uh, they have not done the right thing many, many, many times over. Barack Obama, unfortunately, did not do a lot of things that he could have done. Why he allowed things to happen concerning immigration, it is true that under his administration, immigrants were not treated very well, and that was uncalled for. The fact is, though, that they weren't being treated fairly for the last 30 years. Um, First time I ever read a book about immigration was back in the 90s, and it was about a woman who was being held in a cage. A cage, does that sound familiar? Back in the 1990s in New Jersey for months, if not years. I don't remember if it was months or years. But in a justice system in the United States, it shouldn't be anything more than a few days. So, it's been, human rights in the United States. It's been a tragic story. Black Lives Matter, and I think we're going to kind of ease on over to another issue real quick. The whole Black Lives Matter thing. Man, I am behind it 1 billion%. I'm not African American. I don't know how much DNA. If I did a test, I would probably have maybe, I don't know, probably 0% or 1% or 2%. But and my blood is Middle Eastern, so and probably somewhat European. So, but this country, and again, we go to the magic word of power and money and making laws. And it is not only African Americans that have been beaten for hundreds and hundreds of years and enslaved. Well, they have enslaved, that's pretty unique. But white America, and that can be defined in a lot of different ways. Uh, American Indians, the Native Americans, been slaughtered from the 1630s forward. Really, let's make it the 1620s or 1490s. They've been slaughtered. Hawaiians and Hawaii, that's another whole story. Hawaii. Hawaii is not even a legal state. It's not a state legally. Uh, the people and the government of Hawaii, when U.S. interests, corporate interests, got there was a nation called Hawaii. There were Hawaiians there, and they did not want to become part of the United States. They fought very hard against it. And one of the presidents that most people have never heard of, or maybe heard of because he's the only president who had two terms but not connected, Grover Cleveland, he did the right thing and said no to a Republican Senate that tried to steal Hawaii from Hawaiians. He said no, and McKinley, the next president, said yes to that scheme. And I was lucky enough to find a book at a garage sale that had the entire first-hand history of the communications between the negotiators of the Hawaiian and the Filipino rape by the American government. And so I was lucky enough to get that. And reading that over and over again is a horrifying history and bloody history of the United States colonialism in the Pacific Ocean, where we illegally take Hawaii, illegally take the Philippines, uh, not from the Spanish, but from the Filipino people. Filipino people wanted to become free, saw us as you know a godsend from the Spanish colonialism of 300 years, and then the United States murders nearly 500,000 Filipinos on Filipino soil, which is typical of the United States. Uh, and the United States doesn't give up the Philippines until after World War II, just before the British give up India. The United States, people aren't taught the Filipino-U.S. war. The Filipinos were the good guys. They were trying to become free. The other problem with that period of time, which, by the way, Hawaii, the Philippines, 1898, all happened at one time under McKinley. They call it the Spanish-American War, but they really should call it the War of American Rape of the Philippines, of Hawaii, and of Puerto Rico. Because Puerto Rico was taken also in 1898 during the same military economic action, colonial action. It was all done for military and corporate reasons everywhere. Corporate for the Philippines and Hawaii, and both of them were corporate and both of them were for the military. Military bases in Hawaii, obviously Pearl Harbor eventually became a naval base there, and an army base and naval base in the Philippines. And corporate interests in Hawaii, I think most people are aware of the cattle and the agricultural interests in Hawaii. And in the Philippines, it was to have a very close trading post for our ships and our people and our corporations to get to Asia and China, which at the time, 1900, the turn of the century, China, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Nanking, all of that stuff. Huge markets. China was at that time also still had the most people in the world, so you had gigantic markets. So the United States wanted to be close to that market. So it was all economics. It was all military. It had nothing with freedom, and it's all It's all bullshit is what it was. And it was all murdering people, murdering Hawaiians, and murdering just tens of thousands of Filipinos, hundreds of thousands of Filipinos. In a population of less than 20 million, we killed nearly 500,000. That's not taught in American books. How do I know? The family that I've married into is Filipino. And I have been to Philippines many, many times. So, um, so that's it for about now, I think. A little bit of a history lesson, and I guess we'll get into the politics of this election year coming up next time. Next slide.